What Chuck Yeager said when a general called him just a hillbilly pilot. Sometime in 1943, an officer's mess at a training base somewhere in the American Southwest. Flight Officer Chuck Yeager, 20 years old, from Hamlin, West Virginia, was eating dinner when he heard it. The voice came from 2 tables away, a staff officer, a major, college-educated, probably East Coast, polished uniform, polished accent, the kind of voice that came from a world where people went to universities and joined fraternities and knew which fork to use at dinner. The major was talking to another officer, not quietly. You see the new batch from the Flying Sergeant program? They're sending us hillbillies now, farm boys, mechanics, kids who can barely read. One of them is from West Virginia. Can you imagine? A West Virginia squirrel chaser in a fighter cockpit. Laughter. The kind of laughter that's not really about humor. The kind that draws a line between us and them. Between the educated and the uneducated. Between the proper officers and the mechanics who somehow got wings. Yeager heard every word. His Appalachian ears, tuned since childhood to pick up the softest sound in the quietest forest, caught every syllable across 2 tables and the noise of 30 men eating. He didn't stand up, didn't walk over, didn't make a scene, didn't say anything at all. He finished his dinner, went to his barracks, went to sleep, woke up the next morning, and flew. That was his answer. Not words, flying. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories about the men who let their actions speak louder than anyone's opinion. Chuck Yeager grew up knowing what prejudice tasted like. Not racial prejudice, class prejudice. The particular American brand that divides people not by the color of their skin, but by the sound of their voice and the name of the school they didn't attend. He was from Hamlin, West Virginia, population 400, Appalachian Hills. His father drilled gas wells. His mother raised 5 children. He dropped out of the educational track that leads to college because college wasn't a concept in Hamlin. Nobody went. Nobody could afford it. Nobody's parents had gone. The path from Hamlin led to the gas fields or the mines or the army. That was it. When Yeager enlisted in September 1941, he was a high school graduate with a mountain accent and grease under his fingernails. The Army made him a mechanic, which was fine. He understood machines. He could fix anything with an engine. But when the Flying Sergeant program opened in 1942, allowing enlisted men without college degrees to apply for pilot training, Yeager signed up. Not because he dreamed of flying, because the pay was better. $66 a month for a mechanic, $75 for a pilot. Simple math. He showed up at flight school and immediately stood out. Not for his skill, for his accent. The accent was pure Appalachian, a soft, rolling, unhurried drawl that stretched vowels and dropped consonants and sounded to East Coast ears like ignorance. Like a man who couldn't think fast because he couldn't talk fast. Like someone who belonged behind a plow, not behind a control stick. The other cadets were mostly college boys. Middle-class kids from cities and suburbs who had grown up with books and libraries and the assumption that intelligence correlated with education. They heard Yeager's accent and made their assessment. Hillbilly, hick, squirrel chaser. He wrote about it years later in his autobiography, without bitterness, with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a man who understood that prejudice was a fact of life, not a personal insult. I was a raw kid often made fun of as a hillbilly. I ran up against officers who looked down their noses at my ways and accent and pegged me as a damned down-home squirrel chaser. Squirrel chaser, that was the term, said with a smirk, said behind his back and sometimes to his face. A label meant to diminish him, to put him in a box labeled uneducated rural and keep him there. They didn't know that the squirrel chaser had 20/10 vision and could hit a moving target at 50 yards with a .22 rifle. They didn't know that the instincts they dismissed as primitive were the exact same instincts that would make him the deadliest pilot in his group. They didn't know that the boy they laughed at would become the most famous pilot in the history of aviation. But Yeager knew something they didn't. He knew that the cockpit didn't care about your accent. The cockpit didn't care about your degree. The cockpit cared about your eyes and your hands and your nerve and your ability to process information faster than the machine was moving. And in all of those categories, the hillbilly from Hamlin was better than any of them. Flight school proved it. Not slowly, not gradually, immediately. From the first training flight, it was obvious that Yeager had something the college boys didn't. A natural, instinctive feel for the airplane. The ability to sense what the machine was doing through the seat of his pants, through the vibrations in the stick, through the sounds of the engine and the wind. His instructors noticed. The same men who might have dismissed him as a hillbilly in the mess hall watched him fly and revised their opinions. The kid from West Virginia flew like he'd been born with wings. Not polished, not textbook, but effective. Devastatingly effective. He graduated from Luke Field, Arizona on March 10th, 1943, Class 43C. Wings pinned on his chest, flight officer rank, the wartime equivalent of a warrant officer, not a commissioned officer, not a gentleman by act of Congress, a flying sergeant who'd been given wings because the Army needed pilots badly enough to lower its standards. That was how some people saw it. Lowered standards. The Hillbilly program. Give the farm boys wings and hope they don't crash too many airplanes before the real pilots arrive. Yeager arrived in England with the 357th Fighter Group in November 1943. New base, new airplane, the P-51 Mustang, and a new set of officers who heard his accent and reached for the same label. The 357th had its share of college-educated pilots, officers who had come through the traditional path, ROTC, cadet programs, men who assumed that their education gave them an edge over the enlisted pilots who had come up through the ranks. The air over Germany didn't care about any of that. On March 4th, 1944, his 7th combat mission, Yeager shot down his first enemy aircraft, a Messerschmitt Bf-109, during a daylight raid over Berlin. Clean kill, the kind of precise, efficient shooting that his instructors at Luke Field had seen in training and that the Bf-109 pilot never saw coming. The next day, he was shot down himself. 3 FW-190s caught him over Bordeaux. He bailed out at 18,000 feet, evaded through occupied France for weeks, amputated a man's leg with a pocket knife in the Pyrenees, and carried him over the mountains to Spain. When he got back to England, they tried to ground him. Policy. He went to Eisenhower, got cleared for combat. Then came October 12th, 1944. 5 kills in one mission. Ace in a day. 5 Messerschmitts destroyed over Steinhuder Lake. 2 without firing a shot. Stars and Stripes put him on the front page. The headline that told the whole story. 5 kills vindicate Ike's decision. The hillbilly pilot had just put 5 German fighters into the ground in 15 minutes. November 6th. He shot down an Me-262 jet fighter. The most advanced aircraft in the world. Caught it landing at a camouflaged airfield. Dove through a wall of anti-aircraft fire. One burst at 400 yards. The Squirrel Chaser had just killed the future of aviation with a propeller airplane. November 27th. 4 more FW-190s in a single mission against 200 enemy fighters. His group claimed 30 kills, lost 0. By January 1945, when he flew his last combat mission, the hillbilly from Hamlin had 11.5 confirmed victories, a Silver Star, a Distinguished Flying Cross, a Bronze Star with a V for Valor, and the respect of every pilot in the 8th Air Force. Nobody called him a squirrel chaser anymore. After the war, the class barrier rose again. Test pilot school at Wright Field, Ohio, required engineering knowledge, aerodynamics, physics, mathematics. The kind of subjects taught in the colleges that Yeager had never attended. Colonel Albert Boyd, head of the flight test division, didn't care about degrees, he cared about pilots. He watched Yeager fly and saw what the flight instructors at Luke Field had seen 2 years earlier. Natural talent so deep, it looked like sorcery. Boyd picked Yeager for the X-1 program, the mission to break the sound barrier, the most important test flight in the history of aviation. The Bell Aircraft Company's own test pilot had demanded $150,000 for the flight. The Army said no. They'd find their own pilot. They chose the Hillbilly. On October 14, 1947, Chuck Yeager climbed into the Bell X-1 with 2 broken ribs and a broom handle to pull the hatch shut. He flew to Mach 1.06 at 45,000 feet. The first human being to break the sound barrier. No college degree, no engineering background, no silver spoon, no right fork at dinner. Just a squirrel chaser from Hamlin, West Virginia, who could see further, fly better, and think faster than anyone else in the sky. He wrote about the prejudice one more time in his autobiography. Not with anger, with gratitude. For the institution that looked past his accent and gave him a chance. The Air Force as an institution never let me down for an instant. In spite of where I came from or what I lacked, they trained me and gave me every opportunity to prove myself. He paused in the text, then added the sentence that defined his philosophy. There never were black pilots or white pilots in the Air Force. There were only pilots who knew how to fly and pilots who didn't. That was the lesson of Hamlin, of the cockpit, of the war. You are not your accent. You are not your degree. You are not the label someone pins on you in an officer's mess. You are what you do. And what Chuck Yeager did was fly, better than anyone, before or since. The major from the officer's mess, the one who called him a squirrel chaser, is forgotten. Nobody remembers his name. Nobody remembers his college or his rank or his polished accent. Everybody remembers Yeager. If someone dismissed you because of where you came from, how you talked, what school you didn't attend, what would you do? Would you argue? Would you complain? Or would you do what Yeager did and let the work speak for itself? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about the men who proved everyone wrong, make sure to subscribe.